My father slid a folder across my dining table and the sound it made was almost surgical. A soft scrape that cut straight through the room. "Sign the deed or we take you to court." He said it like he was delivering numbers in a quarterly report. Not threatening his own daughter. His voice didn't shake. Mine did. But only on the inside. I looked at my mother, hoping she'd soften this, hoping she'd step in the way mothers do when things go too far. She didn't even lift her eyes. She stared at the polished surface of my table like she was ashamed to be reflected in it. My sister sat beside them, arms crossed so tightly she looked like she was restraining herself from lunging. Jaw clenched in that familiar way she did when she believed she deserved something, simply because she wanted it. They were all sitting in my penthouse. My penthouse. The place I bought with a decade of grinding through 60-hour weeks, eating leftovers, taking overtime no one else wanted, walking home in the dark because I was too exhausted to care about safety. 3 years of blood in the soil of this place. 3 years of my name, my actual name on every page, every document, every wire transfer, and they wanted me to hand it over like a spare jacket my sister could borrow for a fresh start. I said no. One word. Steady. But inside, every nerve was screaming because saying no to your family feels like touching fire. Dad opened his briefcase without blinking, like he'd prepared for that answer. Like my refusal was the final step in a process he had already mapped out weeks ago with a lawyer who didn't even know my face. I opened mine too, but all I had in it were questions like, how do you prove you're not the villain when the people who raised you have already written the script and cast you in the role you never auditioned for? And before I even go further, I want you to ask yourself something, because this is where too many people lie to themselves to avoid the pain. If your family gave you this ultimatum, would you hand them your home just to keep the peace? And if your answer is yes, even for a second, you need to stay for this story, because what happened next is the exact reason people like you get hurt. Grab something to drink. You're not ready for what comes after this moment, and before you settle in, hit subscribe if you've ever been the black sheep, because only black sheep understand the kind of betrayal I'm about to tell you. And if you walk away without subscribing, at least leave a comment explaining why you think you don't need to, because silence at moments like this says more about you than you think. I could feel their eyes on me, measuring me, deciding what I owed them, and here's the part that stings the most. They genuinely believed they were right. They believed blood outranked effort, that my sister's comfort mattered more than my sacrifice, that I should shrink my life to make hers easier. So before the real storm hit, before the lawyers and the lies and the family group chats that turned into public bonfires, I asked one question, a quiet one, a small, almost polite question. Why? And if you've ever asked your family why they treat you differently and watched them pretend they don't understand the question, then you already know exactly how that moment felt. But stay with me. What happened next changed everything. And if you click off before you hear it, you'll miss the part that might save you from making the same mistake I almost made, believing that loyalty and self-destruction are the same thing. Keep watching. This is where the story really begins. Let me back up, because none of this started at my dining table. This wasn't a sudden explosion. It was a slow leak that began years ago, long before mortgages and court threats and signatures on embossed paper. I'm the older daughter, technically the firstborn, the one who was supposed to be the blueprint, but I was never the favorite. And I don't say that lightly. I say it the way someone says they finally see the shape of a bruise in the mirror, after pretending for years it was just bad lighting. My sister was the sun in our house. Everything revolved around her, warmed her, bent toward her without question. When she turned 16, she walked outside to find a red BMW sitting in the driveway with a giant bow on it like she was starring in a commercial. I got a bus pass taped to a birthday card. My mother smiled when she handed it to me and said, "You're smart. You'll figure it out." as if intelligence could replace a car engine or keep me dry when the sky opened up on the way to my shift. My sister went to a private university with a college fund waiting for her like a runway lined with lights. She joined a sorority, traveled every spring break, came home with stories about beaches and parties and friends who all looked like they'd been cast from the same catalog. I went to a state school. I worked nights at a coffee shop, smelling like steamed milk and cheap espresso, balancing textbooks on my knees during quiet hours. I lived in a basement studio with one small window that barely let the sun in. But I convinced myself it was enough, because wanting more felt like ingratitude. They never asked how I was doing. They asked about classes, never about exhaustion. They asked about grades, never about loneliness. But they always asked if I could babysit, if I could help Dad move furniture, if I could pick up my sister from the airport when she returned from Cancun. They made me useful, not valued. Useful, and maybe you know what that feels like. Maybe you grew up being the dependable one, the strong one, the one everyone assumed would survive without help. If that's you, hit subscribe right now, because people like us get forgotten unless we speak loudly enough to remind the world we exist. And if you don't want to subscribe, at least leave a comment explaining why you'd rather stay silent while watching someone pour out a story that feels a little too close to your own. Silence is a choice. My life became a series of receipts, and I mean that literally. My first boss, Claire, a woman who could read a financial statement faster than most people read menus, told me something I didn't understand until years later. Track every dollar like it's evidence. One day, you'll need it. I didn't know what she meant. I wasn't planning to take anyone to court. I wasn't planning to defend myself from my own family, but something about the way she said it stuck to me like glue. So I saved everything, every pay stub, every rent check, every tax form. While my sister posted spring break photos, I posted nothing because I was either working or sleeping or counting the $47 left in my checking account until the next shift. 10 years passed like that. 10 years of saying no to dinners, no to vacations, no to buying anything that wasn't necessary. 10 years of being told I should be happy with whatever scraps life gave me. But here's the part that will matter later. So listen closely and don't drift. I didn't save out of fear. I saved out of instinct. Something inside me knew that if a day ever came where I had to prove my worth to the people who claimed to love me, they wouldn't believe me unless I showed them the whole trail. And I swear to you, if you've ever had that same gut feeling, that quiet warning that your family loves you only as long as you don't inconvenience them, then you need to stay for every second of this story. Don't click off. Not yet. The part you need to hear is coming. And if you leave now, without subscribing, I guarantee you'll forget this lesson and repeat the same mistake with someone who doesn't deserve the version of you that fights this hard to survive. When I finally hit $84,000 in savings, it felt unreal. I had never seen more than 3 digits in my account growing up. I checked the online banking app daily, almost obsessively, not because I was proud, but because I was terrified something would happen, some emergency, some crisis, some unexpected need that would take it from me before I could use it to change my life. But nothing did. And one day, I walked into a real estate office, sat across from an agent, and bought the penthouse I had only allowed myself to imagine in the quietest corners of my mind. 3 bedrooms, floor-to-ceiling windows, 23rd floor. A view that made the whole city look like it belonged to someone who had earned it, my name on the title. Mine. My parents didn't show up for the closing. They didn't even text. My sister posted pictures from her 3rd vacation that year. I posted a photo of my keys. My mother commented one word. Nice. That was it. No congratulations, no pride, no surprise. Just the same flat tone she used when I told her about the coffee shop job. You'd think that moment would have opened my eyes, that I'd finally understand the dynamic for what it was. But we grow up believing we owe the people who raised us access to the parts of our life they never bothered to help build, and it's hard to unlearn that. So I kept working, kept saving, kept living, kept pretending everything was fine. But the truth is, the hierarchy of my childhood never stopped. It simply grew up with us. And once money entered the picture, real money, life-changing money, that hierarchy sharpened its teeth. But don't worry. You're about to see exactly how deep those teeth can sink. Stay right here. 3 years passed quietly after I bought the penthouse. Or at least it looked quiet from the outside. Inside, I was working, saving, building, stacking years of financial discipline like bricks around my life, because something in me still whispered, be ready. Ready for what? I didn't know. Ready for who? I should have known. And then 3 weeks ago, my mother called. Let's do dinner. Just family. Just family were the words she used. As if they had ever meant comfort to me. I should have known. You probably know what I mean, how your body recognizes danger long before your brain does, how your stomach drops before the moment even happens. That was me walking into their house that night, pretending I didn't feel the shift in the air. The dining table was set like it was Thanksgiving. Candles, placemats, cloth napkins. My mother only brought those out when she wanted something. And she wanted something badly. My sister and her husband were already there. Sitting so close together they looked fused. Like two people performing happiness for an audience they needed to manipulate. We made it through appetizers, then dinner, then dessert, and the whole time, I could feel this static under my skin, like the room was waiting for a cue. It came when my mother cleared her throat. Sweetheart, we need to talk about your living situation. I put my fork down. My living situation. My father leaned forward, fingers interlaced, posture stiff. You're in a 3-bedroom penthouse alone. It's wasted space. My sister's hand drifted dramatically to her stomach. I'm pregnant, she said. And there it was. The performance. The act. The script they had rehearsed without me. I smiled politely, because pregnancy is never the problem. The manipulation wrapped around it is. Congratulations, I said. My mother's voice softened. Soft in the way a threat can be soft when it's wrapped in sentiment. She needs room, stability. You don't really need 3 bedrooms, do you? I felt the air shift the way a storm alerts the trees before the first drop falls. What are you asking? My father didn't flinch. Not once. We want you to sign the penthouse over to your sister. You can move into something smaller. Something reasonable. I laughed. A real laugh. The kind that comes out when something is so absurd your body reacts, before your mind can stop it. You want me to give her my home? My mother didn't miss a beat. It's not about giving. It's about family. The way she said family felt like a trapdoor disguised as an invitation. My sister started crying. Soft at first, then louder. Her hands trembling in a way that didn't match her eyes at all. I just want my kids to have what you had. Oh, wait. You never wanted to share anything. And there it was, the lie wrapped in guilt, wrapped in a lifetime of revisionist history. I stood up. I bought it. My name, my mortgage. The answer is no. My father rose too. Always needing to physically mirror dominance. Always needing to remind me who he thought held the power. He threw his napkin on the table like he was discarding evidence. You have 1 week to think about what family really means. Then he walked out. My mother leaned in as she passed me, her voice low enough to cut without witnesses. You're going to regret this, and if you've ever been threatened with regret by the very people who should protect you, you understand why my chest tightened in a way I couldn't explain. Before I go further, I need you to do something for yourself, not for me, for yourself. If you've ever had a family member try to twist guilt into obedience, hit subscribe, not because it helps the channel, but because it forces you to say out loud that you're done letting guilt dictate your life. And if you won't subscribe, At least leave a comment explaining why you think you don't need to join people who refuse to let manipulation win. I promise your answer will tell me everything about your childhood. 3 days passed. 3 heavy, quiet, suffocating days. Then a certified letter arrived. Thick paper. Law firm letterhead. My hands shook before I even opened it, because nothing good ever comes on paper that thick. They were claiming my parents had an equitable interest in the penthouse, that there had been an oral family trust agreement, one they intended to enforce. I read it twice, then a third time. It was a lie dressed in legal formatting and criminal confidence. That same day, my sister's husband posted on social media, "Some people forget where they came from," praying for my wife and her family. The comments poured in like gasoline on a fire. Cousins, aunts, distant relatives, people who hadn't spoken to me in years suddenly had opinions. My phone lit up with calls and messages, all of them carrying that same familiar tone, accusation disguised as concern. I stopped answering. I stopped replying. Then, a voicemail from my mother. Her voice cracked, but not with sadness, with theater. "I never thought I raised someone so cold. If you don't do the right thing, don't come to Christmas. Or any holiday, ever." I sat on my couch with the city lights glowing through the windows. And for 2 seconds, I'll admit this, I wondered if maybe she was right. Maybe I was selfish. Maybe blood meant more than contracts and blueprints and receipts. But then I saw it. The binder, sitting on my bookshelf like it had been waiting for this moment. I walked over, pulled it down, opened it, and the first page reminded me of a truth my family hoped I'd forgotten. The purchase agreement, my name, my down payment, my mortgage, my signature. And there, in the seller's notes, a line I had forgotten existed. Buyer's parents decline to co-sign or contribute. Transaction is solo. My parents never intended to help me build anything. They only wanted to take. And if you've ever had someone try to rewrite your history while standing in the home you built without them, then you already know why this moment lit something in me I couldn't put out. Stay with me. The real unraveling is about to begin. And trust me, you don't want to miss the part where everything they thought they could hide comes into the light. The first receipt in that binder told me something simple and undeniable. I owned the penthouse. Alone. No partners. No promises. No family trust. No whispered agreements made over dinner. Nothing. But the second receipt, the one I hadn't looked at in months, told me something far more important. It told me why they suddenly wanted it. Why they had walked into my home like collectors instead of parents. Why they had rehearsed tears and softened voices and legal threats. I flipped through the binder slowly, deliberately, page after page, like excavating the truth from under years of emotional debris. Mortgage payment ledger. 3 years, 36 payments. Every single one pulled from my checking account. Principal, interest, taxes, insurance. Total paid to date, $157,000. All mine. Parent contribution, 0. Sister contribution, 0. Anyone else contribution, 0. It was all so clear I felt stupid for ever doubting myself. Still, I kept reading, scanning, flipping, because something deep inside me knew there was more. And then, I found it. A credit report I had pulled 6 months earlier when I considered refinancing. My broker had run a routine cross-reference by address. My sister's name popped up, tied to $68,000 in unsecured debt. Credit cards maxed out. Personal loans past due. A defaulted car lease. All less than 2 years old. I stared at those numbers until they blurred. Then they snapped back into focus with a clarity that felt like a slap. I turned the page. A county lien search I had requested for my own unrelated research. And there it was. My parents' home, a second mortgage recorded 11 months ago, amount borrowed, $125,000. I whispered the numbers out loud. like reciting a spell that finally revealed the creature hiding behind the curtain. 68,000 in her debt, 125,000 in their new mortgage. My equity, 370,000. Enough to clear all of it, enough to reset their lives, enough to save them, enough to drain me. They weren't trying to help my sister, they were drowning, and I was the lifeboat they planned to steal. They weren't asking me to be generous, they were demanding I sacrifice the one thing in my life they had never touched. And the worst part? They believed they deserved it. My phone buzzed then, cutting through the silence. A text from my aunt. How can you do this to your own sister? Screenshots followed, group chats, comments, disguised insults. People I never spoke to suddenly acting like moral judges of a story they weren't even in. And if you've ever watched your own family try to turn the world against you, you understand the kind of cold that spreads through your chest in moments like this. But before I tell you what happened next, I want you to hear this part clearly. If you've ever been the scapegoat, the problem child, the one they blame because you're the easiest to target, hit subscribe right now. Not later, not maybe, now. And if you refuse, then drop a comment explaining why you'd rather sit back and watch someone else fight the battle you've been running from your entire life. Because people who don't speak up end up living the same story again and again until they finally break. I wasn't going to break. Not this time. Not again. My father called an hour later. No greeting. You want to tear this family apart over a piece of real estate? Fine. We'll see you in court. And when you lose, you'll have nothing. No family. No home. Nothing. Then he hung up. And in that moment, something inside me settled. Not anger. Not fear. Something colder. Something sharper. Something that felt almost like peace. Because once someone tells you you're alone, the pressure to keep pleasing them disappears. You stop begging. You stop hoping. You stop explaining. You finally see the truth. They don't love you. They love what you give them, and the second you stop giving, they call you selfish. My phone vibrated again. A text from my mother this time. Your sister's marriage is falling apart. This penthouse could save her. But you don't care, do you? The manipulation was almost impressive. They had built an entire story where I was the villain, the selfish one, the ungrateful daughter who refused to save the family. I almost laughed. But instead, I went back to the binder. Because the binder had no feelings, no guilt, no twisted narratives. It had facts. Cold, hard, surgical. Facts. I read everything again, top to bottom, letting the truth sharpen itself inside me. Then I did something I hadn't done since I was a child. I called my cousin, the only one who hadn't texted me, the only one who hadn't joined the digital mob. She answered on the first ring. Are you okay? She asked gently. Instead, I asked her one question, the one that mattered. What's really going on with my sister? Silence. Long, dense silence, then a sigh that sounded like she had been holding it for months. Her husband lost his job 8 months ago. He hasn't told anyone except your parents. My stomach dropped. They're 3 months behind on the condo. Your parents refinanced their house to cover the first 2 months, but they're tapped out now. I closed my eyes, letting the pieces lock into place. So the plan is get me to sign over the penthouse, sell it fast, use the equity to clear her debt and keep my parents' house out of foreclosure. My cousin exhaled, a reluctant yes. There it was. The truth. Plain, calculated, ugly. They weren't saving a life. They were raiding a vault. My vault. My life. My work. My decade of sacrifice. I felt my heartbeat slow, not out of calm, but out of clarity. I wasn't family anymore. I was an exit strategy. Thank you, I told her. And I meant it. I hung up. Then I made one more call. The one that ended the war before it even began. If you're still here, keep watching. What happens next is the part they never expected. The part where I stopped being the quiet daughter they could push around and become the version of myself they hoped would never show up. Her name was Diane Cho. I found her after 2 hours of scrolling through legal profiles, reviews, court records, and case summaries. Former prosecutor. Real estate litigation. Zero tolerance for fraud. The kind of woman whose presence alone could make a guilty person rethink every lie they ever told. When I called her office, I didn't expect to get an appointment so fast, but the receptionist said Diane had an opening the next morning. And for the first time in days, something in my chest loosened. Not relief. Just space. Space to breathe. Space to think. Space to fight. I arrived at her office at 8:57 a.m. I remember because I stood outside the glass door for 3 minutes, steadying myself for the moment I finally stopped playing defense. She greeted me with a handshake firm enough to break a lesser person's self-doubt. "Show me what you've got," she said. I placed the binder on the table like it was a child I had been protecting my whole life. She opened it with the care of someone handling evidence, not memories. She didn't rush. She didn't skim. She read every document, every signature, every note in the margins. And the whole time, her expression stayed sharp but calm, like she was assembling a puzzle she already understood. When she finished, she closed the binder gently, folded her hands, and looked at me with eyes that didn't pity me. They assessed me, they measured my resolve. Then she spoke. "They have no claim, legal or equitable. None. If they file, we will bury them." The certainty in her voice felt like armor. She outlined the plan, clean and surgical. Step 1. We file for declaratory judgment. A court order confirming you are the sole legal owner and extinguishing any claim they pretend to have. Step 2. We send a cease and desist to your parents and your sister. We outline the evidence. Your down payment, your mortgage payments, the seller notes, the title deed, the absence of any written agreement. Step 3. We warn them. If they proceed with a frivolous lawsuit, we counterclaim abuse of process, intentional infliction of emotional distress if necessary, and we go after legal fees. I sat there absorbing every word, feeling something I hadn't felt since the day I bought the penthouse. Control. And before I go any further, I need to say something to you directly, because too many people watching this right now are living smaller than they should, just to keep someone else comfortable. If you've ever lowered your voice, lowered your needs, lowered your worth to avoid being called difficult or ungrateful, hit subscribe right now, not later. Now. If you won't, at least leave a comment explaining why you think people like us should keep shrinking while everyone else takes what they want, because that mindset is exactly how people lose everything they build. I wasn't going to be that person, not anymore. I signed the retainer that afternoon. Diane didn't waste a second. In 6 hours, she drafted everything: the motion, the cease and desist, the documentation index, the exhibits list, every file stamped, dated, ready to fire. She walked me through each piece one more time, making sure I understood the structure of my own defense. "You have more evidence for ownership than most married couples do," she said. "This isn't a debate. This is cleanup." I recorded a video summary of all the facts, timestamped it, uploaded it to a locked cloud folder, not because I planned to post it, but because I knew what my family was capable of when desperation mixed with entitlement, and I wanted my truth preserved somewhere no one could distort it. The next morning, silence, the kind that feels like the world holding its breath. Then, 72 hours later, my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered. Their attorney. His voice was tight, urgent. "We'd like to request an emergency settlement conference to avoid costly litigation." Costly litigation, that told me everything. They had finally seen the documents. They had realized the house of cards they built was already collapsing. So I agreed, on the record, with Diane beside me. Not because I wanted peace, but because I wanted closure, and I wanted to watch them hear the truth they thought they could outrun. The conference room was downtown. High floor, glass walls, a view that made the whole city look small. Fitting, considering what was about to happen. Diane stood beside me like a shield made of steel and patience. Then the door opened. My parents walked in first. My sister behind them, their attorney trailing like a man already regretting accepting the case. They looked tired, smaller, as if the weight of their own choices had finally begun to crush them. And before I tell you exactly what happened next, I want you to stay with me, because this is the moment everything turns. This is the moment they realize they chose the wrong daughter to underestimate. And if you click away before hearing this part, you'll miss the exact blueprint you need if anyone in your life ever tries to take what you built. Keep watching. Trust me, you're going to need this. The moment they walked into that conference room, something shifted. Not in the air, in them. My father didn't have the same rigid posture he used at the dinner table when he tried to intimidate me. My mother didn't have that serene, weaponized softness she used when she guilted me into silence. My sister didn't even look angry anymore. She looked scared. It was the first honest expression I'd seen on her face in months. Diane greeted them politely, her voice steady, controlled, almost gentle in the way a storm cloud looks harmless from a distance. Their attorney sat down last, flipping through his folder like he already knew it wouldn't help. Diane opened her binder, the same binder they thought would break me but ended up protecting me more than any of them ever had. Before we waste the court's time, let's establish the facts. She slid the first exhibit across the table, the purchase agreement, title deed, down payment receipt, loan documents, all in my name, all signed by me, all time-stamped, all legally airtight. Their attorney's eyes moved fast across the pages, but his shoulders dropped with every line. Then she slid the next exhibit. 3 years of mortgage payments. Every month. Every amount. Every deduction from my checking account. Principal. Interest. Insurance. Taxes. Parent contribution. 0. Sister contribution. 0. Anyone contribution. 0. My mother's face went pale. The kind of pale that comes from realizing the story she rehearsed doesn't match the facts on paper. My father opened his mouth to interrupt, but Diane raised a single finger. Calm but final. I'm not finished. She slid the third exhibit. My sister's credit report. $68,000 in unsecured debt. Late payments. Defaults. A car lease abandoned 18 months into the term. Then she slid the fourth exhibit. The county lien search. My parents' second mortgage. $125,000 borrowed 11 months ago. Interest climbing, payments behind. She paused. Then she looked at them the way a surgeon looks at a tumor she's about to remove. This is the motive. On the record. In black and white. My sister broke first. Her breath hitched. Hands trembling. Her voice cracked as she whispered, I didn't think it would go this far. She covered her face as tears spilled through her fingers. And for once, I believed they weren't crocodile tears. They were fear. Pure, raw fear. Not of me. Of consequences. My mother shifted uncomfortably, staring down at her lap like the patterns on her skirt held all the answers she didn't want to say out loud. My father clenched his jaw hard enough I could see the muscle twitch. Their attorney cleared his throat. His voice wavered. We weren't aware of all these documents. Diane tilted her head slightly. Then why did you threaten my client with litigation? Silence. Heavy silence. The kind that presses on your lungs. Then Diane leaned forward just enough to change the temperature in the room. Your claim has no legal foundation. No equitable foundation. No contractual foundation. If you file a lawsuit, we will counterclaim for abuse of process, seek full legal fees, and request sanctions, and we will win. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. My father's eyes darted between the documents like he hoped the ink would rearrange itself into a different outcome. My mother swallowed hard. My sister sobbed quietly into her hands. And here's the part I want you to hear clearly, because it matters more than anything else in this entire story. They weren't ashamed for what they did. They were ashamed because they got caught. And if you've ever had someone in your life who only apologizes when the truth corners them, hit subscribe right now. And if you refuse, drop a comment explaining why you'd rather protect people who would watch you drown as long as it keeps their feet dry. Because that's the mindset that turns victims into volunteers. Diane wasn't finished. She slid the final document, a pre-drafted settlement agreement. Parents and sister acknowledge my sole ownership. They release all claims. They agree to non-disparagement. They agree to no further contact regarding the property. My father's voice came out rough, strangled, like gravel being ground under a heel. This is ridiculous. Diane didn't blink. What's ridiculous is attempting to steal your daughter's home. Falsify an oral agreement, smear her reputation, and then expect no consequences. Sign the agreement, or we proceed. Their attorney leaned toward my father and whispered something urgently, the kind of whisper that carries panic no matter how quiet it is. My father's shoulders collapsed an inch. Then another. He signed. His signature shook. My mother's hand trembled as she reached for the pen. She didn't look at me when she signed. My sister signed last. The page blurred under her tears. Diane closed the folder with one clean motion. This matter is resolved. Any further harassment will result in immediate legal action. We stood. My parents stayed seated, as if the gravity of their own downfall kept them pinned to their chairs. I walked out of that room feeling taller than I had ever felt in my life. Not proud, not triumphant, just free. Before the elevator doors closed, my phone buzzed. A message from my cousin. "You won? Are you okay?" I stared at the screen, unsure how to answer, because the truth is complicated. Winning doesn't always feel like healing. Sometimes it just feels like silence. But stay with me. The story isn't over. Not even close. What happens after the war is just as important as what happened during it. And the part you need to hear next is the part everyone else skips, because it's the part that hurts the most. Walking out of that conference room felt like stepping into a world that was suddenly too quiet. Not peaceful quiet, not comforting quiet. The kind of quiet that follows an explosion, when your ears are still ringing and your body hasn't caught up to the reality that the danger is gone. The elevator doors closed. And for the first time in days, I didn't feel hunted, but I didn't feel victorious either. Victory implies celebration, relief, a sense of triumph. What I felt was something harder to name, something like grief wearing armor. I got back to my penthouse, the same space they had sat in just days earlier, demanding I hand it over. And for a moment, I stood inside the doorway, unable to move. The place looked the same, smelled the same, sounded the same, but it didn't feel the same. It was like their presence still lingered in the walls. The entitlement, the guilt, the rehearsed tears, the assumption that everything I built was somehow theirs, by inheritance of attitude. I set my keys on the counter and sank into the couch, staring at the city lights that had always comforted me. But that night, they felt distant, like they belonged to someone braver, someone stronger, someone smarter than I felt in that moment. My phone buzzed again. Another message from my cousin. "You won. Are you okay?" I didn't respond because I didn't know how to answer a question with two truths. Yes, I won. And no, I wasn't okay. People love stories with clean endings. The hero wins, the villains retreat, the credits roll. But real life is messier. Winning against your family doesn't feel like a victory parade. It feels like walking through the wreckage of a house you spent years trying to believe was safe. It feels like realizing you were raised on a foundation of instability that everyone else pretended was normal. And the worst part? the guilt still whispers. Even after everything they did, even after the lies and threats and legal warfare, a piece of me still asked the forbidden question, did I do the right thing? That's the trap, the lifelong conditioning, the emotional leash that keeps people tied to those who harm them. And I want you to hear me clearly, because someone watching this right now is still blaming themselves for drawing a boundary that saved their life. If you've ever protected yourself and then wondered if you were the villain, hit subscribe right now. And if you refuse, I want you to leave a comment explaining why you believe you deserve to feel guilty for choosing yourself over people who only show up when they want something. Your answer will reveal more about your past than you realize. That night, I opened the binder again, not because I needed reassurance about the facts. I knew the facts. I needed reassurance about myself. I flipped through each page slowly, letting the truth anchor me. You built this. You paid for this. You earned this. You did not steal anything. You did not harm anyone. The emotional fog didn't lift all at once. It came off in layers, like peeling back years of quiet self-blame I didn't even know I was carrying. I thought about my mother's voicemail, the shaking voice, the dramatics, the weaponized disappointment. I thought about my father threatening to take me to court, as if the idea of destroying me financially didn't cost him a single heartbeat. I thought about my sister crying in that settlement room, not because of remorse, but because the plan didn't work. And then I thought about myself, not the daughter they raised, but the woman I became in spite of them. The woman who tracked every dollar. The woman who built her own safety net. The woman who didn't back down when the people she loved became the people she feared. For the first time that week, I felt something like pride. Not loud pride, not boastful pride. Quiet, steady, grounded pride. The kind that sits in your bones and reminds you that you survived a test you didn't know you were taking. Days passed. Silence. No texts from my parents. No calls from my sister. No group chat explosions. No social media posts. Just nothing. The absence of noise became its own kind of noise. Part of me expected a new attack, another smear campaign, another threat disguised as concern, another manipulative plea for me to fix problems I didn't create. But nothing came. And sometimes, silence is more frightening than conflict, because silence forces you to look at what remains after the dust settles, and what remained was this truth. Once I stopped being useful to them, they stopped being present at all. That realization hurt more than any legal threat ever could, because it confirmed what I had suspected for years but never wanted to admit. They didn't love me for me. They loved the version of me that bent, that yielded, that gave, that apologized, that handed over pieces of her life to avoid being called selfish. Once that version of me was gone, they had no use for the real one, and that's when it hit me. I wasn't mourning them. I was mourning the idea of them. The version of my family I had built in my head. The one that didn't exist, but that I clung to anyway, because everyone else seemed to have it. And before I take you into what happened next, I need you to hear this part clearly. You cannot fix people who only come to you when they need saving. You cannot heal people who hand you their pain like an unpaid bill. And you cannot love people into being better versions of themselves. If you agree, hit subscribe. If you disagree, comment why. Because I want to know what kind of life taught you to stay loyal to your own destruction. The next chapter of this story isn't about them. It's about what I chose to do with my life once they stopped trying to take it. And trust me, this part is where everything begins to shift again. A week passed before anything shifted. Not a message, not a voicemail, not even a passive-aggressive post online, just silence. Thick and heavy, the kind that settles into a house like fog under a door. I went to work. I came home. I cooked. I cleaned. I slept in the same bed, beneath the same ceiling, in the same penthouse I fought to keep, but everything felt different. You expect chaos after a confrontation like that. You expect explosions, dramatic texts, fiery accusations, maybe even a last-ditch plea wrapped in guilt, but instead, nothing came. And the truth is, silence from someone who once controlled you can be more disorienting than noise. Silence forces you to hear your own thoughts. Silence forces you to acknowledge what the fight truly cost you. Silence forces you to look at the space your family once occupied and realize they never filled it with love, only with expectation. One morning, I checked my phone out of habit, expecting a message that wasn't there. That's when it hit me. The people who once demanded everything from me couldn't even give me a goodbye. They retreated, not because they respected my boundary, but because they had no more use for me. And if you've ever been discarded by someone who once clung to you only for what you provided, you already know the sting that settled in my chest. A sting that isn't quite sadness and isn't quite anger. Something between the two. Something like recognizing the truth too late. I went for a walk that day, taking the long path around the block, letting the cold morning air clear my thoughts. I watched other people walk by, couples laughing, parents wrangling toddlers, students rushing somewhere important. Life moved around me as if nothing had happened. But inside, I knew something had shifted forever. You don't walk away from a battle like that unchanged. You don't expose the truth about your family without exposing parts of yourself you didn't want to see. You don't win without losing something too. That afternoon, my cousin called. Not a text, not a screenshot. A call. The moment I answered, she exhaled softly. "I talked to your mom." I felt my stomach tighten, bracing for some fresh wave of drama. "What did she say?" She hesitated. Then, she said, she told everyone the meeting was a misunderstanding. She's saying the lawyer misinterpreted things. That they weren't really trying to take the property. That it was blown out of proportion. I laughed under my breath. Of course. When manipulation fails, they rewrite the story. My cousin continued. Some of the family believes her. Some don't. People are talking. I shrugged, even though she couldn't see it. Let them talk. She paused. I don't think they expected you to fight back. That part made something in my chest warm, not in a comforting way, but in the way truth sometimes burns before it heals. Because she was right, they expected me to fold. They expected guilt to work the way it always had. They expected me to hand over my life the way I used to hand over my time, my weekends, my emotional stability. And if you've ever surprised someone by standing up for yourself after years of swallowing your pain, hit subscribe right now, and if you won't, at least leave a comment explaining why you still hesitate to choose yourself even when choosing others has cost you everything. I hung up the phone and sat at my dining table, the same table where this entire disaster began, and for a moment, I let myself feel everything I had been holding in. The anger, the betrayal, the grief, the strange relief, the unbelievable exhaustion. People think the worst part of betrayal is the act itself. But it isn't. The worst part is that it forces you to confront how long you ignored the warning signs. How many times you excused the behavior. How many times you told yourself they didn't mean it. How many times you believed that love meant staying quiet. I wiped my eyes. Not because I was breaking, but because crying felt like rinsing old wounds clean. Later that week, I heard from someone I never expected. My sister's husband. He didn't text me directly. He posted online. Something vague. Something meant to paint himself as the supportive partner surviving a difficult family situation. But beneath the surface of his carefully chosen words, I could see the truth. Their marriage wasn't struggling because of me. Their marriage was struggling because he hid months of unemployment. Because he lied. Because he let debt pile up. Because he pretended everything was fine until it wasn't. My part in their mess was never real. I wasn't the cause. I was the solution they tried to steal. Watching that unfold made one thing clear. I had saved myself from becoming the sacrificial lamb for problems I didn't create. And if you've ever been pressured to rescue people from consequences they earned themselves, hit subscribe. You need to remind yourself you're not required to clean up other people's chaos. Days turned into weeks. Slowly, the penthouse began to feel like mine again. Not a crime scene of emotional warfare, but a home. The sun still came through the windows the same way. The floors still gleamed, the city lights still sparkled. But there was a new stillness to it, a new sense of ownership, not of the property, but of my life. I wasn't waiting for the next attack. I wasn't checking my phone every hour. I wasn't bracing for impact. For the first time in my adult life, the threat wasn't coming from inside the family, and that silence, once unsettling, began to feel like peace. But don't think the story ends here. What happened next was something I never expected, because fallout doesn't just hit the people who tried to take from you. It hits everyone connected to the lie. And what surfaced in the next weeks would change everything I thought I knew about what happens after you walk away. Stay with me. The next part matters more than you think. Time has a strange way of stretching and tightening after a storm. Some days moved fast, blurring past me in a rush of errands and work and small routines. Other days moved painfully slow, like the minutes were forcing me to sit with everything I had avoided feeling for years. Healing never comes the way people expect. It doesn't walk in as a grand moment or some cinematic revelation. It comes quietly, disguised as ordinary things. The first sign came unexpectedly on a Tuesday morning. I logged into my banking app to check the balance before paying a bill, something I had done 1,000 times without thinking, but this time, something clicked. For the first time since the confrontation, I actually felt ownership of the numbers on the screen. They were mine, truly mine, not borrowed, not questioned, not targeted, not threatened, mine, my work, my discipline, my years. And for a moment, I felt something close to pride settle in my chest. Not the performative kind, not the kind that needs applause, the quiet kind that anchors you. I made a decision that morning, one small, practical decision that said more about my healing than anything I could have said out loud. I refinanced the penthouse, lowered the rate to 4.1%, saved myself $340 a month. It wasn't about the money. It was about claiming a future that didn't revolve around surviving other people's chaos. That $340 felt like a declaration, a quiet whisper saying you don't owe anyone your stability. I used part of that savings to start something I had always dreamed about, but never believed I deserved to create. A scholarship fund. For first-generation college students, for kids who work night shifts and live in basement apartments and save every dollar because they have no safety net waiting for them. I named it after Claire, the boss who told me to keep receipts long before I knew why that mattered. I signed the paperwork with a kind of trembling excitement I hadn't felt in years, not because I wanted recognition, but because I wanted someone else to know the feeling of having a door open when the world had tried shutting every single one. Starting that fund did something inside me I didn't expect. It rewired the meaning of my struggle. It made all those years of grinding and saving and being overlooked feel like they had led somewhere beyond survival, like they had purpose. And before I take you deeper into this part, I want to say something directly to whoever is listening right now and feels like they're drowning in the aftermath of setting a boundary. Choosing yourself does not make you selfish. It makes you free. And if you know that's true but you're still afraid to admit it, hit subscribe right now. If you refuse, leave a comment explaining why you think you don't deserve peace until someone else approves of it. I want to understand how deeply they trained you to believe pain is loyalty. Weeks passed before my mother reached out. Not with a call, not with an apology, with a birthday card, a blank card with her signature. No note, no message, nothing vulnerable enough to be misinterpreted. Just ink and silence. I stared at it for a long time, unsure what I was supposed to feel. Gratitude? Anger? sadness. Nothing fit. So I sent a text. 2 words. Thank you. Not cruel. Not warm. Neutral. Boundary-sized. That's where things stayed between us, not broken, but not repaired. Just shifted. My father didn't contact me at all. Not a message. Not a call. Not even a forwarded meme he would have sent me years ago when he still pretended to engage. His absence confirmed what the battle had already revealed. The moment I stopped being useful, I stopped being family in his eyes. My sister surprised me, though. One night, as I was cooking dinner, my phone buzzed with an email notification. The subject line was her name. Just her name. I opened it, expecting anger, or excuses, or a final attempt to guilt me into a reconciliation I wasn't ready for. Instead, I found 2 words. I'm sorry. No excuses, no manipulation, no blame. Just the apology I never thought she was capable of giving. I sat at the kitchen counter, reading those 2 words over and over. My hands trembled, but not from anger, from release, because despite everything, despite the legal war, and the betrayal, and the lies, a part of me had always wished she would see herself clearly, even for a moment. I responded, I accept your apology. I hope your new city treats you well. That was it. No reopening old wounds. No pretending we were suddenly close. Just 2 women acknowledging what happened and choosing different paths. Healing isn't reunion. Healing is clarity. Life settled into a new rhythm after that. I hosted a small dinner, 6 people. My cousin, 2 friends. Diane, a couple of coworkers who had stood by me quietly while my world was unraveling. We ate on the balcony as the sun set across the skyline. No tension, no unspoken obligations, no walking on eggshells, just laughter, just air, just life. And as I looked around that table, I realized something I had spent years refusing to admit. Family isn't defined by blood. It's defined by behavior, and sometimes, the people who share your DNA treat you worse than strangers ever would. That night, for the first time in a long time, the penthouse felt alive, not because of the walls or the view or the rooms or the furniture, because of the people in it, people who weren't there to take, people who weren't there to manipulate, people who didn't need me to bleed so they could breathe. And I want you to hear this next part very clearly. Your success is not an emergency exit for people who refuse to build their own ladder. If that hits you in the gut, subscribe. You need that truth more than you think. But if you won't subscribe, at least leave a comment telling me who in your life keeps trying to make their failures your responsibility. I read every one. The next section, that's where everything you've watched unfold finally settles into its true meaning. The truth no one wants to say out loud. In the quiet weeks that followed, something unexpected happened. The world didn't end. My life didn't collapse. The relationships I lost didn't leave a crater. Instead, everything that wasn't meant for me simply fell away. And for the first time in years, I saw my life without the distortion of obligation. It was like walking through a house after a storm, messy in places, damaged in others, but still standing, still mine. I had spent so many years believing that being the good daughter meant being endlessly available, endlessly forgiving, endlessly accommodating. I believed saying no was unkind. I believed drawing boundaries was disrespectful. I believed protecting myself meant I was selfish. But the truth? The painful, liberating truth? The people who love you won't need to be protected from your boundaries. Only those who exploit you will call you selfish for having them. That realization rewired me. Slowly, quietly, permanently. I started paying attention to things I used to ignore, like the way my shoulders relaxed when I wasn't bracing for a passive-aggressive comment, like the way my breath felt deeper in a home that no longer held the echoes of threats. like the way my mind felt clearer when I stopped carrying the emotional debts of everyone around me. I stopped checking my phone expecting some new crisis. I stopped rehearsing explanations in my head. I stopped feeling that constant tug of war between my autonomy and their expectations. I started sleeping better, eating better, living better. Healing doesn't announce itself. It doesn't show up with fanfare. It arrives gently, in moments you almost miss, like drinking coffee in silence without guilt, or waking up without dread, or realizing you went an entire day without thinking about how to defend yourself. But healing also brings something else. Clarity so sharp, it borders on painful, and the clearest truth I learned was this. I used to think choosing myself meant losing my family, but in reality, choosing myself just revealed who my family actually was. People tell a lot on themselves when you stop letting them use you as a resource. Some disappear. Some attack. Some rewrite the story to cast themselves as the victim. Some get loud. Some get silent. Some finally show the version of themselves they always hid behind niceties. And that's when you realize the version of them you loved wasn't real. It was a version you created to make the hurt feel softer, a version that allowed you to survive. But survival isn't living. I didn't fight for that penthouse because I was attached to the property. I fought because losing it would have meant losing the proof that I built something, losing the one thing in my life that wasn't touched by their manipulation, losing the legacy of every hour I worked, every dollar I saved, every sacrifice I made. That home wasn't a place. It was a symbol, a reminder that I clawed my way into a life they told me to figure out alone, then tried to claim once I succeeded. And if you've ever had someone try to take credit for a life they never helped you build, hit subscribe right now. If you refuse, leave a comment explaining why you still think love means letting people take from you until you have nothing left. I read every response because I want to understand the stories behind that kind of loyalty. The truth is, I never wanted to be at war with my own family. I never wanted lawyers or documents or settlement agreements. I didn't want the fight. I wanted fairness. I wanted respect. I wanted the version of family people write greeting cards about, but expectations are often the birthplace of heartbreak. When people show you who they are under pressure, believe them. My parents showed me entitlement dressed as tradition. My sister showed me desperation dressed as helplessness. And I showed myself something I didn't know. I had resilience dressed as quiet strength, a kind of strength that doesn't roar. A strength that simply stands its ground, calm and immovable. That strength changed everything. It protected me. It saved me. It rebuilt me. It taught me that you can love people deeply and still choose not to let them hurt you again. It taught me that boundaries aren't walls, they're doorways that separate who can come in and who doesn't get the privilege anymore. And I learned something else too. Something people rarely admit out loud. Sometimes peace looks like losing people who were never going to choose you unless you were suffering. That kind of loss is not a tragedy. It is a correction, a realignment, a quiet rescue. So when people ask me if I regret anything, I tell them the truth. I regret not standing up for myself sooner. I regret believing that love had to hurt. I regret thinking loyalty meant silence, but I do not, for a single moment, regret protecting my own life. And that's what this entire story comes down to. Not the money, not the property, not the legal battle. It's about reclaiming yourself, reclaiming your narrative, reclaiming your sanity, reclaiming the parts of you that were buried under guilt, fear, manipulation, and obligation. And if you're watching this right now, feeling that same weight, the kind that crushes your chest when you think about setting a boundary, stay with me. The story isn't over yet. What comes next is the part no one talks about, the part where you discover who you become after the war, after the truth, after the fallout. The version of you that rises from it is the one you've been trying to meet your entire life. In the months that followed, something inside me shifted in ways I didn't expect. It didn't happen overnight. Healing rarely does. It began in small, almost invisible ways, tiny moments that would have slipped past me years ago because I was too busy surviving other people's expectations. I noticed it one morning when I woke up and didn't feel that familiar tension in my shoulders. I lay there for a long moment, staring at the ceiling, waiting for the mental roll call of worries to begin. What did I do wrong? What will they be angry about today? What emotional fire do I have to put out now? But the list didn't come. There was just stillness. Quiet. Breathing. My breathing. Mine alone. Another shift happened at the grocery store. I picked up a carton of berries, organic, expensive. The kind I used to put back because I constantly prepared for a future bill, a sudden demand, a phone call asking for money, help, time, sacrifice. But this time, I didn't hesitate. I put it in my basket. Not because berries mean anything special, but because, for once, I didn't feel the weight of someone else's crisis sitting on top of my wallet. Healing is funny like that. It appears in the small choices long before it announces itself in the big ones. I started noticing how much mental space I had now that I wasn't juggling their drama. The energy I used to spend decoding passive-aggressive comments, anticipating guilt trips, bracing for emotional landmines, it all returned to me like someone handing back stolen property. I started filling that space with things I never had the bandwidth for. Books, walks, music, cooking, long showers. Even silence felt different, like it finally belonged to me. And somewhere in that growing quiet, I found something I had been missing for years. Myself, the version of me before the guilt, the version of me before the boundaries were tested, the version of me before my success became someone else's life raft. I realized I had been living my life wearing armor that wasn't mine. Armor forged out of obligation, fear, and the belief that I had to earn the right to exist without being accused of selfishness. That armor cracked during the legal battle. It shattered afterward, and what remained was not the weak, broken person they expected. What remained was someone who finally understood her own worth, a worth that was not purchased with favors, a worth that was not dependent on approval, a worth that was not diminished by someone else's resentment. And I want you to hear this clearly, because someone watching this has been told their entire life that choosing themselves is an act of betrayal. Protecting your peace is not cruelty. Refusing to be drained is not selfish. Separation is not disrespect. And boundaries are not punishments. They are instructions for how you deserve to be treated. If you know this hits you somewhere deep, hit subscribe right now. If you won't, leave a comment telling me who taught you that love requires self-abandonment, because healing begins by naming the lies. The scholarship fund grew quietly in the background. A few students applied. Then more. I read their stories, kids who worked 2 jobs, kids who slept in cars, kids who carried entire families on their backs, kids who reminded me so much of myself. I had to step away from the computer and breathe. One student wrote, "I just need one person to believe I'm not a mistake." That line sat in my chest for days, because I knew that feeling. I lived that feeling, and maybe that's why creating the fund felt so right. It wasn't just charity, it was a reclamation, a rewriting of the narrative I was handed as a child. A way of saying, the cycle ends here. I choose generosity without exploitation. I choose support without expectation. I choose to help without losing myself. Sometimes people think healing is loud, dramatic, film-worthy. But real healing is subtle. It's the friend who texts you without wanting anything. It's the night you laugh so hard you forget you ever cried over people who would have let you drown. It's the moment you realize you haven't apologized for existing in days. It's the softening in your spine when you remember you don't have to brace yourself anymore. One evening, months after the settlement, I walked onto my balcony with a cup of tea. The city glowed beneath me. 1,000 lights flickering like tiny declarations of resilience. I leaned on the railing and realized something I never expected. I wasn't waiting. Not waiting for the next fight. Not waiting for the next guilt trip. Not waiting for the next attempt to take something from me. I was simply living. And living without fear felt foreign. But good. Like waking up in a room without shadows. But the most important shift, the one that changed everything, came when I understood this truth. I didn't become stronger because of them. I became stronger because I finally stopped letting them weaken me. That strength wasn't born from the fight. It was born from the aftermath. From choosing myself every single day. Even when the guilt tried to pull me back. Even when the silence felt heavy. Even when the old patterns tried to reappear like ghosts. I learned how to exist without the constant pressure to fix. To soothe. To shrink. And slowly, piece by piece, without realizing it was happening, I built a life that felt like mine. Truly mine. The final part of this story, the part that comes next, is the part people don't talk about. The part where peace becomes normal again. The part where you forgive, not for them. The part where you understand why everything had to break before anything could be rebuilt. And trust me, you don't want to miss that. Stay with me. Peace doesn't arrive all at once. It doesn't sweep in like a dramatic breakthrough or some sudden, cinematic realization. It slips in quietly, on ordinary days, in ordinary moments, until one morning you wake up and realize you're living a life that no longer hurts. That's what happened to me. It didn't feel like triumph. It felt like oxygen, like finally breathing in a room that had been suffocating me for years. I started noticing things I had been too overwhelmed to see before: the softness in my own voice when I wasn't defending myself, the way my laughter sounded when it wasn't forced out through tension, the way I walked without expecting the ground to fall out from under me. My home, once a battleground, became a sanctuary again. Not because the walls had changed, but because I had. I cooked without anxiety. I slept without bracing. I cleaned without resentment. I moved through the rooms knowing they belonged to me, not merely on paper, but in spirit, in effort, in sacrifice. I had built this life. I had fought for it. And now, finally, I was living inside the peace I had earned. My mother sent another card months later. A simple one again. Her handwriting small. A note this time. Hope you're doing well. Nothing dramatic. Nothing manipulative. Just 6 words that felt like an olive branch, placed carefully in the center of a long, fragile table. I didn't overthink it. I didn't fantasize about reconciliation. I didn't read hidden meanings between the lines. I simply took it as it was a gesture, not a rewrite of the past. I responded with the same energy. Thank you. I'm well. That was our new rhythm. Low contact. Respectful distance. No assumptions. A boundary that didn't need to be defended because it was finally understood. My father remained silent. And strangely, I made peace with that too. Not because I didn't care once, but because caring no longer cost me pieces of myself. Sometimes the absence of someone becomes the closure you never received in words. My sister sent another email months later. A longer one. She wrote about her new city, her new routine, her husband's new job, her attempts at rebuilding their life. She didn't make excuses. She didn't blame. She didn't ask for anything. She simply told the truth she had avoided for years. She said she had spent most of her life believing she was entitled to comfort, stability, and support without earning any of it. She said she envied me, not my home, not my money, but my independence. She said losing access to me forced her to look at herself in a way she never had. That email broke something open in me, not anger, not sadness, but a strange, quiet compassion, the kind that doesn't erase the past, but acknowledges the humanity in its shadows. I wrote back, not with forgiveness wrapped in poetry, not with emotional confession, just honesty. I told her I hoped her new life treated her well. I told her I believed people could change. I told her I wanted peace for both of us. And that was enough. Healing didn't require a grand reunion. It required truth. Real truth. Truth without performance, without manipulation, without expectations. I wasn't rebuilding the family I lost. I was building a new version of myself. One who didn't need their validation to feel whole. The scholarship fund grew. Students sent letters. I read every one. Some made me smile. Some made me cry. All of them reminded me why I survived the childhood I did. Why I fought, the battle I fought, why I never gave up on myself even when the people around me did. One evening, around sunset, I stood on the balcony again. The city glowed below me like a living constellation. The breeze was warm. The air felt softer. I leaned on the railing and let the moment sink into my bones. This life, this peace, this stillness was not something my family gave me. It was something I built, something I defended, something I chose. And that's when the final truth settled in my heart. Your success is not a family emergency fund. Your stability is not a shared resource. Your kindness is not an invitation for exploitation. Your boundaries are not offensive. Your worth is not negotiable. And your life, the one you worked for, the one you sacrificed for, the one you fought for, does not need to shrink just because someone else failed to grow. I turned away from the view and walked inside. The penthouse felt warm, alive, full, not of ghosts, not of fear, not of expectation, but of people who stayed because they cared, not because they needed a lifeline. And here's the part I want to say to you directly. Because if you watched this far, something in this story belongs to you. You are allowed to protect what you built. You are allowed to say no without explaining why. You are allowed to disappoint people who expected your life to be their safety net. You are allowed to leave behind anyone who confuses love with control. And if no one has ever told you this before, let me be the first. Choosing yourself is not betrayal, it's survival. So before you click off, do one thing for me, no, for yourself. If any part of this story touched something deep in you, hit subscribe, not because I need the number, but because you need to stop walking through life pretending your pain doesn't matter. But if you still refuse, at least drop a comment explaining why you believe your voice should stay silent when your story deserves to be heard. I read every word, every story, every truth. And trust me, there's more where this came from. Thank you for staying until the end.